We'll get started and you join us. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the regular board meeting of the West Basin Municipal Water District Board of Directors. And with that, Mr. General Manager, if we have a form determination.
Yes, Mr. President. Director Scott Houston.
Here.
Director Don Deere.
Here.
Director Gloria Gray. Director Harold Williams. President Desi Alvarez.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, we will move on to the Pledge of Allegiance, and if I can ask Janelle to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Mr. General Manager, do we have any public comment?
Mr. President, we have not received any requests for public comment prior to today's meeting, though this meeting is being held both in person and virtually. If there's any member of the public that would like to speak, please let us know by either raising your hand in the room or raising your virtual hand online. And President Alvarez, I do not see any requests.
Okay, so next item is presentation. Actually, I have three proclamations in front of me, but I think I will be passing on.
But only one is
I
for today.
understand.
Correct. Just making sure.
We have a proclamation for Ms. Carol Kirstuck, who is a retiring councilwoman from the city of El Segundo. And I believe that Director Houston will be making that presentation. El Segundo in his.
Be that person.
And we also have a proclamation for Mr. Gordon Erickson, who is retiring from the Culver City Council, where he had served since 2016. And again, we will have Director Houston
Yeah, but I'm
make that presentation.
not going to do an official one here today.
No, you will at their council.
Yes, correct.
And then we're having a proclamation also to the city of West Hollywood. And there's no one here to receive it on their behalf today. Okay, so city of West Hollywood is officially 40 years old. Amazing how fast time goes by. So on this one, is your intent, Director Houston, to present that at the city council meeting?
Yes, well, yes.
All right, so,
I guess what I could do, I could read it if you like, or,
if you will just make the presentation on behalf of.
yes. And then I will be taking this to an upcoming meeting, but we did want to recognize that actually, I believe it's this coming Friday, West Hollywood officially turns 40 years old. Cityhood, probably one of the younger cities in our county. But also the fact that it's part of Division 4 and it's part of West Basin. But let me go ahead and read the proclamation and we'll be making sure. Go ahead.
Maybe you can just read the.
Oh.
If they're not here to receive it,
Okay.
you'll be presenting it.
Yep.
And,
Very good. I'll actually, why don't I do this? I'm just going to say a few words and then that's it. How about that? So I am very, very proud to represent Division 4, of course, and that includes the city of West Hollywood, which was incorporated 40 years ago this coming Friday. Various issues came together at that time for the folks there to become a city. And of course, they annexed into the West Basin service area. So when we think about that city on the west side, and of course, yes, it's a very high gay and lesbian population. It's the focus for them happened to be rent control, among other things. But to be an unincorporated community, the majority of the region's history and then they incorporated, and they've been a very small but mighty city, kind of at the forefront of a lot of issues in our country. So without belaboring it, if you will, but I'm really happy that the board recognizes as part of our West Basin family, the city of West Hollywood. And again, I will be planning to go up to one of their upcoming meetings and present this to them in person. My understanding is they had a big celebration this past Thursday. I had a conflict, but it's a big deal. And I think also in light of everything else going on in the country, I'm sure it continues to be a big deal for a city like West Hollywood. So it'll be very meaningful to them and all of us. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. All right, then we also have two presentations coming up by our respective Sacramento and Washington lobbyists. So, General Manager, would you like to introduce those?
Yes, President Alvarez. And let me also state that I believe Director Gloria Gray has joined us.
Welcome, Director Gray.
Thank you.
And so item 5B is a presentation by our Sacramento lobbyists. It's a Niamela Pappas and Associates. And for this presentation, we have Emily Pappas and Jamie Miner joining us virtually.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for the nice introduction. Happy early Thanksgiving. So Jamie and I are here today, as you'll see on the first slide, to give you an end of session recap. So it seems like it was forever ago because so much has happened since they adjourned, and then election analysis. So, you know, what happened and what we anticipate going into this new legislative year. So the next slide, we just did one quick session in review, though you all or a few of you were at most of these things. So first, you'll recall we did a water district lobby day meeting for you all in Sacramento back in March, and we had a stacked day, as those two of you that were there can attest to, with back-to-back meetings, 9 meetings in total. We included one of the photos there. You were able to also give your leadership award to Senator Caballero and Assembly Member Irwin. You all were lucky enough to have Speaker Rivas down to do a meeting with you all and briefly tour the district. And finally, I know you've heard us year after year talk about this one version water bond, but at the ultimate version, the climate bond passed legislatively and got done over on the ballot initiative. So with that, I will pass it over to Jamie to give you a quick update on the thematics this year and some of the session dynamics. The next slide.
Yeah, just to kind of dive into the overarching themes and just some of the things that we saw this year. You know, it's so soon we forget after the long year when there's so many bills are passed. You have the budget, then you have end of session and elections. It's always good to just do a recap on what exactly we saw. So as many of you know, the session wrapped up on August 30th, and then the governor finished signing bills on September 30th. And then you kind of had that mad dash of the month of October where members were in their districts campaigning. But overall, we saw over 4,800 bills introduced over this 2-year session. So think about every member gets about 50 bills to introduce. So they certainly met that quota. And then you have budget bills on top of that. So the volume is just, you know, very intense. Of those bills, about 1,200 made it to the governor's desk. And unsurprisingly, he had a lower than expected or lower than we've seen in recent years signature rate, with only about 84% of those bills being signed. A lot of the vetoes we saw were just that kind of same message. We are heading into budget, fiscal downturn. We're in the middle of a budget fiscal downturn. It's not prudent to really sign up for new investments statewide. So just by the numbers that just, again, when you look at other states, obviously we stand out with how many bills are introduced that are ultimately signed. As specific to issues we were tracking, over 70 plus bills, anywhere from water, energy issues, but also HR issues, fleet issues, transportation issues. We were actively working with associations and monitoring over 15 bills and being part of those conversations with our trade associations. We were really happy to see, obviously, the climate bond pass. It really, that was a 4-year effort that kind of culminated all in 1 week. when we saw the proposal that was laid at our feet and had to make some quick decisions, but we'll go into a little bit more of that later on. And then just some of the other conversations that took up a lot of the air in the room on the regulatory side, the conservation as a way of life framework that was implementing a bill from a few years ago by Assemblymember Friedman and Senator Hertzberg was finally finalized. That was a multi-year effort, a lot of different iterations, but ultimately the water district industry felt like it was a fair measure that took into account some of the concerns that were raised throughout the process. So that was a net positive. And then the potable reuse regs were adopted. We know we had been watching that for years as well, ever since the passage of the bill almost 5-6 years ago that mandated the board come up with those regulations. So we were happy to see that come to fruition. Sigma, we're heading into the 10-year anniversary this year, so you've probably seen a lot of chatter just on, is it working? What progress have we seen so far? And also the rubber's really meeting the road for some of those probationary basins down south. And then, they're putting forward their the GSPs getting approved or denied. So a lot of drama around Sigma. And then we're continuing to see the administration lean in and focus on their water supply strategy. So we saw an update come out at the end of the year, just on kind of where they are with implementing that strategy, some doubling down on some themes within that strategy that we'll talk about in a little bit. And just next slide. So what do we see as the kind of dynamic for this end of session? You probably read about it in the news. It's always, filled with some gamemanship, but this was extra tense this year. You saw each house kind of leveraging each other's bills, and then the governor in the mix threatening a special session if a certain bill of his didn't pass, which was on oil pricing. It didn't pass the assembly, so he called that special session. And they had to come back in a few weeks after convening a committee to work on a bill that was, again, all focused on oil pricing. That bill, AB 2X1, was signed by the end of October. It's focusing on some minimum reserve margins for oil companies. But after the assembly wasn't willing really to go along initially, they made some changes to it. And then the Senate ended up reconvening after the assembly passed it. They weren't going to reconvene until they passed it. So again, a lot of tension there. We have new leaders. That kind of was one of their first tests of how they would be working together. It'll be interesting moving forward if we kind of continue to see these tense dynamics where the governor comes in with something end of session, or will they be more working together at the outset? So next slide. We'll just breeze over these quickly because there were a lot of bills obviously introduced, but as throughout the process, a lot of them were narrowed or significantly amended to be more favorable on our end. The issue that we reported on last year that took a lot of the air up in the room was water rights for our associations. Ultimately, we got to a good place where our associations could actually support a water rights bill, and this, instead of kind of amending the due process when it comes to that water right and how somebody can exert it, this just focuses on penalties for bad actors. So it was something everybody could agree on, moves the needle forward to kind of address some of the issues they were trying to solve for with those bad actors, but wasn't upending the entire water rights system. 366, this is the California Water Supply Plan that West Basin was very engaged in. This set up a target, a volumetric target for having new infrastructure to meet a certain goal of how much net new water the state needs to be producing to meet the state's needs. This was a coalition effort that we've been very engaged in. It was really a message that we wanted to get across to both legislators, to the administration, that just more needs to be done with the investment of water infrastructure. That message, we really think prevailed. Ultimately, the bill was vetoed after passing pretty smoothly through both houses. Just on fiscal issues, they want to come back next year and work with DWR and the Water Board on how can we kind of fold some of this plan into what they're already doing for water supply planning. So that will become a multi-year effort. Well, we were bummed to see it vetoed, but again, we think we made progress with what the message needed to be. A few other bills that were more impactful to our retail agencies. 2257 was just amended some Prop 218 issues when it comes to notification of water and sewer fees, and this allows some more certainty for that agency in the Prop 218 process. That was signed. 1827, which also looks at different rate structures when it comes to conservation, and if you can assign different rates for those that are conserving. There's an open court case on that right now. This was looking to kind of clarify that. That bill was also signed. And then a lot of problematic bills were thwarted. So AB 2079, which would have taken away or it would have allowed local governments to stop more, groundwater well drilling. That was killed in the first house. 937, which was looking at development fees of projects and interconnection when it comes to water supply. There were some concerns that were mitigated when it first came out of just being a cap on what a water agency could charge. But ultimately, there's some reporting in there and some new standards that we'll have to work on, or our water agencies will have to work on. And then 1255, this is the issue of low income rate assistance. We see something year after year on this issue. This was setting up a voluntary system so that you would automatically be opted in to helping fund this voluntary rate assistance program. There were just a lot of operational and billing issues when it came to implementing this bill. It ultimately failed because of that, but it's something we're going to continue to see, I think, year after year, and that we actually just heard our trade associations want to lead on next year so that they can have the PED and craft something when it comes to this issue that works for the agencies. So yeah, that's just a recap on legislation. And now I'll pass it back to Emily on elections.
Yeah, so as Jamie mentioned, with that, we are now turning to some of the more top of mind things regarding the elections that took place a few weeks ago. We just think this slide is important to show the staggering, again, we'll be faced with. In the legislature, there were 34 open seats that for the most part have been filled this past 2 weeks ago. So that's a 28% change in the legislature that we will see coming in next Monday. And overall, that's a 68% change of the entire legislature since we saw in 2020. I feel like I remember doing this report for you in 2020 thinking, or presenting that, wow, we had this huge, also in the 30 number change of legislators, knowing that this year would be the next big change, a big onslaught for several years to come. So with that, on the next slide, you'll see, we just put up here your legislative delegation. And you'll note here that, with Senator Bradford leaving and Senator Laura Richardson coming into place, that will be our only change going into the new year. And as we talk about a lobby day later on in the deck, you'll note that these will be our focus, but just also wanted to throw out there, we don't just that as we were faced with this new changes a few years ago, we then look to see, does the speaker and pro tem appoint anyone new to the policy committees? Again, we know the key policy committees that, are of impact to us. And so we continue to either reestablish, if we know the member that gets appointed to the committee or chair, or establish a relationship on the district's behalf, depending on who's put in chair. We're hearing rumblings that we may see new committee makeup come around the December holidays. Sometimes in the past, we had seen them around Thanksgiving, but we're not anticipating until December, and then we'll work on a game plan from there. So switching it back to Jamie to go also into the elections, more specifically on some of the key bond initiatives.
Yeah, I think you guys have all been tracking the results. You had a lot of initiatives fail when it comes to kind of more progressive values. I think an anomaly was Prop 4. And it's interesting, it ended up passing with exactly what it was polling earlier this summer, with about 59.6%. At least that's where the numbers are most recently. And that was what the polling was showing earlier this summer. So say what you will about polling, when it comes to some of these issues, they seem to be spot on. I think you all know at this point what's in it and what we'll be able to take advantage of. It has over $386 million for water recycling, funding for groundwater treatment, over $386 million as well. $62 million for brackish desal, and $75 million for water conservation, $110 million for stormwater. Just the dynamic towards the end of session, and it's just something to note because the bill or the bond that finally came together happened so quickly, and those at the table, which really were just leaders within the legislature, where they were trying to please so many folks. Obviously, the numbers for water, even though it's still a larger chunk than any other industry has, it wasn't enough for some of our trade associations. So you saw Aqua go neutral on the bill. You saw Water Reuse go neutral on the bill. They were hoping for at least $500 million. But we, in some of our other trade associations, obviously in support of Senator Allen and his efforts to get that number as high as it is, at 3.8 billion, did feel it important to support the bill. And it was kind of fun up in Sacramento. We got some, different publications on agencies that did support it, and all the way in Sacramento, West Basin support was shown on these flyers. So just a shout out. It was fun to see. So 40% of that, it's this is a key distinction from Prop 1. 40% is automatically carved out for disadvantaged communities. So that's something that's different than the initial bond. We're starting to see, hopefully because these are pots that are just can be refunded, that are already creative, that money can go out the door soon, but it will need to be allocated in this budget process. So, this summer, I'm assuming as that bill comes together in June, before the constitutional deadline of June 10th, a lot of that money hopefully can be allocated, at least initially, to start again getting these projects up and going, and they don't have to reinvent the wheel as far as programmatic elements at the water board and EWR. The next slide on Prop 5. This is one we were watching because it changed the voting structure for bonds to be brought forward to voters. Instead of having to get a 2/3 vote, it would have changed it to 55%. This was a top target for some of those taxpayer groups, the Chamber of Commerce. They put a lot of money into opposing this measure, tens of millions of dollars. So it ultimately failed, was pretty close. It's at about 55% of no vote. But it's just kind of telling, and we'll go into some of the thematics that we see, just where the electorate is from this election. But I think it was disappointing to see this fail, especially because it only had to do with bonds. It didn't even have to do anything with taxes. But it's easy enough, to message the folks that were opposed to it, kept it simple that this would raise taxes for ratepayers. So it did fail. But I'm sure, they'll be back with something in future years, or maybe at the local level on how to address this issue, because it is difficult for folks to go out to bond and have them be successful. Emily,
Thanks. So the slide here is just to look at the numbers coming out of the election, specifically in California. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see we continue to maintain the supermajority nature in both the Senate and the Assembly, with 60 Democrats in the Assembly and 30 Democrats in the Senate. Well, I'll talk about, the Republicans gaining a few seats. They still are in the minority, but we will talk about, what the change means. And you'll notice that both in the Senate and the Assembly, there's one vacant seat over in the Assembly. That's because, as you know now, Congressman Vince Fong won in an early special election when McCarthy no longer ran, but his name was still on the ballot for the Assembly seat before he knew he was taking the congressional seat. So they'll have to take that into a special election of its own to get filled. And that would most likely remain Republican. And over on the Senate side, Senator Janet Nguyen ended up running for an Orange County Board of Supervisor seat, which she won. That may be a contested one where the Republicans play into the election, but that also will need to be filled in a special election. So on the next slide, taking a little bit of a deeper dive, Republicans gained 3 seats total. That's the first time in a decade. Again, while the Democrats retain their 2/3 supermajority nature, one thing we would wonder, and all of us are wondering about, does that moderate or temper some of the progressive legislation that ends up getting passed. I'm not sure it changes anything for what gets introduced, but something that I think people are feeling. The moderate Democrats lost a few members overall in the Democrat versus Democrat races. Voter turnout, despite an increase in voter registration, was at an all-time low, lower than our last presidential go-around. And I know Jody talked a little bit about the initiatives, but the electorate overall was a little moderate. So when we say that, because the minimum wage initiative failed, the rent control initiative failed, and the public safety crackdown, which reversed several of the initiatives that the legislature passed with an overwhelming majority. And then lastly, Vice President Kamala Harris received about 58.7% of the vote to Biden's 64% of the vote. So on the next slide, just looking forward or outward to 2026, as you know, Governor Newsom was not termed out this year. He has 2 more full legislative years. But with that, we are all hearing, those that have put their name into the mix to be considered. And then in here, we put an asterisk next to the names that we're hearing are in the mix potentially to put their names in, but have not yet officially called it. And the newest face on here that wasn't there before the election a few weeks ago is Vice President Kamala Harris. As of this morning, there was an article with one of her advisors basically stating she's seriously considering again another presidential run or perhaps a run for governor. And depending on what happens there, it definitely impacts some of the names we also see up here on the PowerPoint and slide deck. Oh, Jamie, sorry, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, thanks. Oh, and if you want to just move to the next slide for some policy themes that we'll see heading into next year. You guys have been hearing this probably at Met meetings. The governor is laser focused on cementing his legacy. And what has he decided his legacy will be? He's really leaning in on this new version of the Delta Conveyance Project. Just last week, we saw him send out another press release kind of highlighting all the different agencies that have signed on to date. Obviously, the big elephant in the room has yet to do so, but he's lining up many. Director Nemeth over at DWR is now kind of serving as his water czar, not specific to DWR anymore. She's going up and down the state, speaking about the benefits of the DCP project. So I think we continue to see him really leaning in on that, and especially depending on how the Met vote goes this next month, that will be telling to see if he needs to kind of make up for that rate base elsewhere. Sigma, we already touched on this a bit. Is it working? We're 10 years in. The rubber is meeting the road when it comes to a lot of these basins that are in trouble and that have the most, the hardest path to sustainability. Could we see tweaks to it depending on what we're seeing within those basin plans? Most certainly, we see something almost every year kind of limiting a local government's ability to approve different wells. So we could see something again. Water rights, 2 years in a row, this was kind of beaten back, but there will be some new reports that are released at the end of this session, just kind of looking at how the system's working and who is leaving behind allegedly. So we could certainly see a legislator pick this up again. Energy and water pricing and affordability. Obviously, energy pricing is a huge issue for ratepayers. That's why this special session was called. But water affordability too, to an extent, and there's a nexus there. So I think we can continue to see that conversation and that narrative weaving its way into legislation, because the EJ-sponsored bill on low-income rate assistance affordability programs was failed this year. I think the industry is looking to get ahead of it next year. So looking again to sponsor legislation, but who knows if there will be a counter bill or these two different interest groups will be able to meet in the middle on a path forward. But it's certainly a conversation that's going to be had. Permitting reform, we've seen 3 hearings so far over the interim looking at this issue, and different lenses when it comes to housing, when it comes to transportation and energy. but water has been in the mix. You know, what permits or what processes are getting in the way of building new infrastructure? We have some legislators that really want to solve for that. And then, you know, the reaction to the Trump administration. You know, we look back at kind of what happened next year specific to water. The waters of the United States was a huge policy piece that the Water Board had been working on, and during his last term was rolled back. Could we see kind of a reemergence of that dynamic? You look at, you know, different constituents and regulatory levels and impact on things like PFAS. Could, you know, a new administration roll back some of those requirements and then, you know, put more burden on our agencies to kind of meet those levels? That could be something we see. The Chevron decision at the Supreme Court, it, you know, really might limit what the US EPA can do. You know, not that we would see a Trump administration US EPA be very aggressive on a lot of issues when it comes to, you know, environmental protection. But that could embolden our California EPA, our water board, to, you know, have to make up that loss from leadership we might see at the federal level. And then Delta regulations and protections for endangered species, these kind of are intertwined. We have new biological opinions coming out under the Biden administration. Could those be reversed under the Trump administration? And then does California have to step in, set our own limits? You know, that will really be a huge issue that we know President Trump ran on, that he will make it easier to kind of bring water down south. And then the Colorado River, you know, as you guys know, many entities were close on kind of figuring out a path forward under a Trump administration. How did those negotiations progress? Obviously, we're not his favorite state. So are we, you know, somewhat punished in those conversations? That certainly will be something to watch. And will that water need to be made up elsewhere? So Emily's going to talk about our political themes. Those are the policy themes.
Thanks. So basically, you know, again, post election, I'm sure you, I think saw day later, Governor Newsom announced he was going to be the leader of this Trump resistance. So what does that mean? What it means is he called for another special session at the heels of the oil special session being settled. And basically he's going to look at any avenue in which Trump may roll back any of the work or strong work that California feels like they have passed. And part of that is bolstering up our attorney general's legal coffer so that he can be ready to sue depending on what initiative Trump decides to go after. You see a few listed here, whether it's reproductive freedoms or around the environmental space are two of those kind of top issues that have been discussed. Political musical chairs. So, you know, what will Governor Newsom do next? We talked about earlier. And then what does that do to his agenda? So while we mentioned he's being very vocal now in the Trump resistance, given what the elections said nationally, and given how the electorate either didn't come out or came out more conservatively in our own California elections, does that change, you know, some of his agenda later on this year? And then finally, reaction to election results. As I mentioned earlier, are legislators going to be concerned about the most recent round of elections? And if so, does that change what their focus is? In the past, our focus has really legislative has been around equity. Do we see it turn more towards affordability, whether that's in, you know, the cost of living, the cost of goods, the cost of energy that these constituencies are facing here? So the next slide is our final slide before we open up to questions, as I know we've spoken quite lengthily, but here is this is like a holiday gift we look out for every year, and it finally came a few weeks ago, but this is the legislative calendar. It's still in draft form, and it usually does not change, but outlook as to what the key dates that we will be working on behalf of this year, with the members returning on January 6th for the full, not special, but the normal legislative session to begin. And we put this up here because we are planning your lobby day once Sacramento, again, presuming there's an interest. Last year, like I said, we did March, and this year we're looking at 3 dates, 2 in February and 1 in March, I believe on a Wednesday, for example, in which we would just set up, you can come in the night before, first thing in the morning, and we will do back-to-back meetings for you with either our new legislative delegation, some of the members of our current legislative delegation, or if we have committees by then, some key committee members, depending on what our agenda is. So that's the last slide before Jamie and I would love to open up for questions or, anything that you need from us. And again, thanks for letting us be on here, and we love representing the district in Sacramento.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. Any questions from the board members? Director Houston has some questions.
First, I don't have any questions. I just want to commend both of you. Thank you so much for representing West Basin for a number of years now. This is actually a really good roundup of what just happened in Sacramento. It's been quite a year. And I love that you put this calendar here to give us sort of a guidepost as to what's going to happen next year. It'll be interesting to see, especially who gets different committee positions. We do have one new legislative member coming on board, as well as how do we determine what our policy priorities will be next year. So again, I have no questions. Just want to commend you both immensely. Thank you for being great representatives of this district up in Sacramento. And also it's good on this full board meeting rather than sometimes our committee meetings, because, people can hear all this, including our own staff, because it's really confusing a lot of times what's going on up there. And you two put it together very well, and why it's important that the board and our staff has representation up there on our behalf of our residents and ratepayers. So thank you.
Director Gray,
Thank
do
you.
you have any comments?
I think the report was pretty thorough. I just wanted to thank the ladies for the thorough report today and for their, involvement as partnering with us. So thank you very much.
Very nice. Thank you.
And the Director Duke. Any comments? Okay. Well, Jamie and Amy, thank you very much for all the work you guys have done, and we really like having you guys up there representing us. Looking forward to 2025. It's going to be a very interesting year. With that,
Thank you.
Mr. General Manager, would you like to introduce our next Washington lobby?
Yes, and thank you very much. And thank you very much for your patience. This is a lot of information. I do recognize that. But with obviously the elections happening earlier this month, there's a lot of stuff going on in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. As the new year quickly approaches. And so our next item is 5C. It's a presentation by Van Scoyoc and Associates. And for this presentation, we have Pete Evich, Vice President, Jeff Bowman, Vice President, and Ashley Strobel, our Government Relations Manager from Van Scoyoc. So I'll throw it over to them.
Well, good to see you, directors, and thank you for this opportunity. And, as Emily and Jamie had outlined, and the country has had an election, as we all know. And so our presentation will also look to kind of unpack those election results, focusing on some of the elements of most interest to West Basin, what it might mean for key water policy topics, funding issues at the federal level, and efforts related to West Basin's Washington, D.C. advocacy program as we head into the new year with the new administration and new Congress. So with that, let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to say hello and start things off.
Thanks, Peter. I appreciate it. I was sort of chagrined by Emily and Jamie's presentation because they kept using the theme or the word tension, and Pete and I are not unfamiliar with that sentiment right now. So 3 important dates that Pete and I are going to kind of hover around in our presentation today. The first is December the 20th. The next date is January the 3rd, and the next important date is January the 20th. So we are now transitioning in Washington, D.C. to a second Trump administration and a Republican hold on the legislative branch. But before we turn the page, I think it's important to note the productivity or lack thereof of the 118th Congress. Typical Congresses enact anywhere from 500 to 600 laws over their 2-year lifespan. This Congress set a new low bar of 106 laws. And this is largely because of tight majorities in the House and Senate. But we're going to face tight majorities again in the 119th Congress. Right now, for the lame duck session, we're looking at about a 219 to 213 Republican majority in the House and a 51-49 notional majority for the Democrats in the Senate. That's not going to change very much. It'll be probably 53-47 for the Republicans in the Senate. And in the House, it'll be somewhere close to where we are now, somewhere in the 220 to 214, or 220 to 215, or 221 to 214. So in terms of the elections, New York and California were bright spots for the Democrats, particularly in the House. New York, they were able to flip 3 House seats. And in California, it looks like the Democrats were able to flip 2 seats, depending on the results of one of the elections in Orange County. The president-elect, as everybody has been paying attention to on the news, he's been nominating individuals for his cabinet. He's already nabbed 2 Republican House members, one from New York and one from Florida, for prominent roles. He did nominate a 3rd sitting House member, Matt Gaetz from Florida, for Attorney General, but Mr. Gaetz withdrew his nomination last week. But by nominating House members for cabinet positions, the president-elect is already cutting into his very narrow majority and will likely have to wait for the outcomes of special elections to determine the final operating majority that he'll have to work with in the next Congress. While these House members will likely retain their positions during the nomination process here, the hearings will start after January the 3rd, and if they're confirmed by the Senate, those seats will remain open until the special elections occur. Next slide, please. Okay, we now have a new senator that we'll be working with. I have to say, it's nice to have a senator that is familiar with West Basin after working years with his office. It's nice to have Senator Padilla back as well. He'll continue to accrue seniority, which is critical to having our voices heard in the United States Senate. I don't just mean that for West Basin, I mean that for California in general. West Basin's House delegation continues to hold some influence in the Democrat leadership hierarchy, with Ted Lieu continuing his role as the caucus vice chair. So he'll be helping set policy priorities for the House Democrats during the 118th and now soon to be the 119th Congress. Next slide, please. Speaking of our House delegation, most of our House delegation returns intact. That's always good from a reliability standpoint. We'll have a new House member to our delegation, Representative-elect Laura Friedman. She took Senator-elect Schiff's seat. This is nothing new to us, Advanced Goik Associates. We look forward to getting to know Representative-elect Friedman and the other new members of the House and Senate, or as we like to say in this business, a stranger is just a friend you haven't met yet. As I mentioned before, the House and Senate members will get sworn in at noon on January the 3rd, 2025, and we look forward to working with all of them. I'll turn this over to Pete. Next slide, please.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. With these next few slides, we'll look at the most influential figures within the state of California's congressional delegation, both Republicans and Democrats, as we head into the upcoming 119th Congress. As the Republicans will be controlling both chambers, it's not necessarily a revelation to state that GOP members will be holding more sway, but that's stated in the Senate, as there are only 100 members, and for most legislation in the Senate, it takes 60 votes to get a bill passed. So every senator, regardless of party, maintains a certain level of influence. And as we look at California's 2 senators, we know that Alex Padilla serves on 2 key committees of importance in the federal water sector, the Senate Environment Public Works Committee, with jurisdiction over EPA and the Department of Energy and its programs. And he also serves on the House Energy and Natural Resources Committee, which has jurisdiction over, the Energy and Natural Resources Committee has jurisdiction over Department of Energy, but also the Bureau of Reclamation as well. And so, as we know, all of these are very important to a lot of our efforts at the federal level and the grant programs, policies that impact West Basin. We're still waiting word on the committees that Senator-elect Schiff will be serving on. So we are watching that with great interest, and we'll be reporting back to West Basin as soon as we start hearing more on those details. In the House, in light of the continued GOP control of the House, longtime Riverside County member Representative Ken Calvert will continue to hold significant influence. He's a top House appropriator, a cardinal, and as such, he's been on top of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, which controls the power of the purse over all Pentagon-related programs and funding. In an upcoming slide, I'll touch a little bit more in more detail on Senator Padilla and Representative Calvert's specific roles to California water issues at the federal level. And of course, we are very familiar with West Basin's congressional delegation member, Representative Maxine Waters. Beyond Nancy Pelosi, Representative Waters, she's the second longest tenured California House member. This will be her 18th term in the House, and she'll continue to serve as the top leader for the Democrats on the House Financial Services Committee in the 119th Congress. Next slide, please. Some of the other California House figures of note for the 119th Congress in terms of their high-level roles. There's Representative Pete Aguilar of San Bernardino County, who will be in his second term, serving as the third highest ranking Democratic leader in the House as caucus chair. The House Democrats' top leader has been Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York, followed by Democratic Whip Catherine Clark of Massachusetts. Representatives Jared Huffman and Jim Costa of California are currently in the process of making a bid to be the House Natural Resources and House Agriculture Committee ranking members, respectively. They are attempting to topple the current ranking members of those committees. It appears, though, each has a pretty good odds of being successful. In particular, Huffman, as the potential ranking member of the House Natural Resources Committee, is of particular interest. A number of years back, Huffman, who is a big supporter of water recycling initiatives, visited the Edward Little facility. We spoke to him a couple of years ago at a Aqua DC reception and talked about that, and he remembers it well. And while no longer in an elected leadership role in the House Democratic Caucus, Nancy Pelosi continues to yield a lot of influence behind the scenes. We saw this in display during the move for Biden to step aside for Kamala Harris. Lastly, I thought it was of interest to note that none of the 10 California House GOP members will be serving in a committee chairman role in the 119th Congress. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jeff for next slides. Nope, I'm sorry. It's still me. So a couple things to touch upon with this slide. As I mentioned earlier about Senator Padilla serving on the Senate committees of importance in the water sector. We just wanted to add that Senator Padilla and his staff, we work very closely with them, and often we work very well with them. The senator, his staff have clearly shown over the last couple of years that the senator wants to tackle and take a leadership role on a number of key water issues and initiatives that are important to the state. So with that, the larger California water community has been heartened with his assuming of this role, especially with the passing of Senator Feinstein. She was really kind of the go-to on California related issues. And that said, Padilla has been clear that he's not, should we say, as conservative as Senator Feinstein was on California water policy issues. Most take that to mean that he'll be less likely inclined to buck his party's orthodoxy on environmentally sensitive matters, and as perhaps Senator Feinstein may have been to opt to do in order to forge a compromise middle of the road on these often thorny California water policy decisions. And as we've known, we are heading into the new Congress without the longtime presence of Southern California's water voice, Representative Grace Napolitano. Other Southern Californians who may step up in the coming years are Representative Mike Levin who serves both Orange and San Diego counties. He is on the House Natural Resources Committee and has been a supporter of water recycling and desal initiatives. The Doheny desal facility is in his district, and he's been supportive of Carlsbad and the city of Oceanside's groundwater purification and brine minimization projects. Also, West Basin delegation member Rep. Kamlager Dove, who was entering her second term, also serves on the House Natural Resources Committee, and we believe will be amplifying her voice on that committee as it relates to California water policy issues. And so we're looking to further engage with her office. So I believe with that, at the next slide, we're gonna turn it over to Jeff.
Thanks, Pete. As I mentioned previously, we've already seen the president-elect nominate most of his cabinet members in recent weeks. They'll still have to undergo Senate confirmation hearings. Again, those won't start until after the new Congress convenes at noon on January the 3rd. Specific to West Basin, he's nominated former House member Lee Zeldin from Long Island, New York, as administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. He served at the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure when I was working there, so he's a familiar face, and he was very active on many infrastructure issues during his tenure in the House. He also nominated Governor Doug Burgum of North Dakota for the Department of the Interior. The president-elect and Governor Burgum got to know each other during the presidential primaries, as the governor was also a candidate. I think while the next administration will surely reemphasize the development of fossil fuels as part of the nation's domestic energy supply, I don't think renewable energy will necessarily be de-emphasized. Renewable energy doesn't discriminate based on political party, and there's been a lot of job creation associated with renewables in both Democrat and Republican districts in the last several decades. In terms of some of the other offices at the federal agencies that we engage with, like EPA's Office of Water, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Army Corps of Engineers, we're hearing names for some of these positions, but we don't anticipate those positions getting filled until well into calendar 2025, until after the cabinet nominees are confirmed. Next slide, please. So we always talk about the first 100 days of any new or incoming presidential administration. The first 3 bullets on this list are what Republicans would like to tackle in the first 100 days. While I would say reinstating the 2017 tax law is probably the top priority, this will give Congress the opportunity to review the entire U.S. tax code. Border security and enhancing domestic energy production will also be top priorities in the first 100 days. We speak of energy production. I think Emily and Jamie mentioned this. We also anticipate there will be some enhanced permitting reform legislation tied to that agenda item. That could benefit West Basin. All the top 3 priorities here will need congressional help. The administration will not be able to do this on their own. There will need to be some sort of legislation to enact all 3 of these priorities. The last 2 items on this list will be a little bit more of a long-term initiative. I want to focus on these since they are impactful to West Basin. First, I want to talk about DOGE, or the Department of Government Efficiency. This is the advisory committee that was established by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. They are targeting $2 trillion in savings through a reduction in waste, fraud, and abuse. This is not the first time something like this has been attempted. The Reagan administration attempted this. The Clinton-Gore administration had something called reinventing government. There was a former Senator Alan Simpson and Erskine Bowles created what was called the Super Committee in the 2000s. The president-elect also believes that the headquarters level personnel in the federal departments in Washington, D.C. are too large, so there will be an effort to reduce the size of the D.C. departments and decentralize the federal workforce. Ultimately, it's determined by Congress what is funded and what is cut pursuant to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. As to the last bullet, incoming administrations will sometimes try to de-emphasize the work of a previous administration, and while I think we'll see some changes in the nation's climate policies, emphasis on disadvantaged communities, I think, will still continue. The previous Trump administration emphasized nomenclature like economic opportunity zones to address disadvantaged communities, since those too do not discriminate based on political parties. So I think we're going to be, at least in Washington, D.C., continue to try to serve disadvantaged, unserved, and underserved communities. Pete, next slide.
Thank you, Jeff. With these next 3 slides, I'll do the first 2, and Jeff will do the third. We'll be touching upon a number of the current key federal water policy issues of most interest, we think, to West Basin and Western water and public water system stakeholders throughout the country. Public water systems have been concerned about the cost of complying with the recently promulgated EPA rules surrounding PFAS and lead pipes. I'll focus on the PFAS side because of the requirement to eliminate all lead pipes over next several years is impacts other states more significantly than California. But as it relates to PFAS, compliance with EPA's very low maximum contaminant limit for 6 PFAS chemicals by April 2029. Industry pegs the nationwide cost of compliance at roughly $4 billion. The Trump EPA may very well take a look at this rule and perhaps aim to revise it to provide water operators with more flexibility and time to comply. Simultaneously, we know a lawsuit by AWWA and other water associations have been filed challenging EPA on this rule. Also associated with PFAS in 2024, EPA came down with its rule designating PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substances under the federal CERCLA or Superfund law. That's also drawn consternation by the water community as the CERCLA law places water operators as a potential liable polluter. West Basin has joined efforts calling on Congress and the EPA to exempt passive receivers such as water agencies, which weren't responsible for the presence of these chemicals in the water system. This rule may also receive another look by the Trump administration, as well as potential congressional action to look at legislation to specifically exempt water systems from the PFAS CERCLA rule. On the campaign trail, Trump has taken aim at the Inflation Reduction Act law and will be looking to roll back certain policy provisions of the statute as well as remaining funding it provided for climate-related initiatives and programs. The Inflation Reduction Act is the law that also contained over $4 billion through the Bureau of Reclamation for conservation and drought mitigation initiatives. Funding that has not been spent or obligated could be looked at as clawed back as part of the tax cut and budget reconciliation measure that will be taken up by Congress in the first half of 2025. So we'll be watching that extremely closely. In addition, not all of the bipartisan infrastructure funding, also called the IIJA, that was provided to the Bureau of Reclamation and EPA for water grant and loan programs has been fully allocated. So whatever funding has not been spent could be at risk for potential rescindment. This includes Title 16, the competitive Title 16 program, the large-scale Title 16 program, Water Smart grants, EPA SRF funding, and other streams that were funded under the bipartisan infrastructure law. Congress will have a say in this, and this is another one we'll be looking at closely because these are very important programs to West Basin and Western water communities. Moving forward here, West Basin has long been a supporter of legislation to amend the federal tax code to make homeowners exempt from paying income tax when they receive rebates from water utilities for their efforts to conserve water. The congressional tax bill that will be taken up in the first half of next year provides an opportunity to advocate for the provisions inclusion in that measure. And lastly, on this slide, the originally authorized WIN Western Water Reclamation Grant programs for Title 16, desal water storage have expired and need to be reauthorized. Senator Feinstein has had attempted to start the ball rolling on this process through her STREAM Act, which included some aggressive changes in how these programs were run and how they were funded. However, given what may be difficult dynamics entering the 119th Congress, enactment of even a simple reauthorization extension of current law may be considered a victory. So with that, next slide, please. The upcoming annual congressional appropriations budget that will be taken up by the 119th Congress will be tightening up spending allocations for domestic discretionary programs, which would include programmatic grant accounts for EPA reclamation, Army Corps of Engineers. On the agency side, in issuing notices of funding opportunities coming out of these agencies, we expect the Trump directive will be to downplay references of the climate resiliency benefits associated with project applications and therefore project awards. And so as you know, federal funding applicants and applications come out, we'll need to take a note of these changes. I know Jamie and Emily mentioned this and theirs, that, you know, in their presentation, the Colorado River's existing guidelines for operating and allocating the river's water to the basin states is set to expire in 2026. The Trump administration, Department of Interior, Reclamation, will need to pick up the current administration's effort to work with the lower and upper Colorado River Basin states to negotiate a new operating plan for Lake Powell and Lake Mead water for decades into the future. I've included in there a quote that I just recently saw from the general manager of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, that elections don't add water to the river. So, you know, we'll see how that, we'll be watching closely how that unfolds starting next year. Again, this tension between the Trump administration, Newsom administration, this was touched upon by Emily and Jamie as well. This will, you know, color water policy decision at the federal level, and so we'll be watching that with great interest. I mean, one area, you know, the Bay Delta biological opinion, you know, Trump moved that forward, and the Biden administration has been working on the reinitiation of the biological opinion of what Trump proposed on the long-term operations of the CBP and the State Water Project. You know, the Trump plan provides maximum, you know, flexibility for releases, and it was very controversial with environmental groups, as they believe it will endanger salmon and other fish populations. But, you know, we could expect the Trump administration to make sure that their initial biological opinion move is stays in place from a regulatory perspective. And so with that, we're going to go to the next slide, and Jeff will take that.
Thanks, Pete. In terms of ratepayer assistance, there was a COVID era program to address low income ratepayers. I think if this incoming administration and the next Congress, if they're prioritizing the cutting of funds from existing program, there is at best, I think, uncertainty in authorizing new programs. So right now, in the interim, we don't see a path forward for any kind of low income ratepayer assistance authorization in the next Congress. In terms of waters of the United States, again, thanks to Emily and Jamie for teeing this up for us, but we didn't coordinate this, I promise. The Supreme Court in the Sackett decision this summer, pursuant to Justice Alito's opinion, overturned almost 2 decades of the significant nexus test. And now the incoming administration will have to craft a regulation defining a water of the United States as having a permanent surface connection to a navigable water body. This continues the trend of shrinking the role of the federal government under the Clean Water Act, specifically Section 404, the dredge and fill provision. This will provide more autonomy to states in determining protections for water bodies, but the federal footprint will need to shrink to comply with the Supreme Court's decision. The other thing that occurred this summer was the Supreme Court overturned 40 years of case law in relation to Chevron doctrine. They ordered lower courts to no longer provide deference to federal agencies when they interpret and carry out otherwise ambiguous laws enacted by Congress. I think this will likely have 3 impacts. Congress will have to provide more specificity when they craft their laws. Second, this will likely open floodgates to more litigation over regulatory exercises by the federal government. Even though the Chevron decision was meant to be prospective, I don't think this is going to halt entities filing suits claiming the federal government exceeding their authority provided by Congress. And lastly, I think this will likely curtail rulemaking efforts by any administration unless Congress has provided them explicit direction to do so. In the case of the incoming administration, this may provide them with some additional reasons or ammunition to further cut regulations. We're already seeing lower courts bring the Chevron deference or Chevron doctrine deference into their decisions. There was a recent NEPA decision over the last couple of weeks that determined that the Council on Environmental Quality exceeded their authority under NEPA as early as the late 1970s. Next slide, please. So we are right now in the middle of what we call a 5-week lame duck session of Congress. We've exhausted 2 of those weeks. We've got about 3 weeks left. On this chart is what needs to be accomplished. We thought, I think Pete and I both thought we were a little optimistic coming into the lame duck. We thought this lame duck Congress was going to try to clear the decks and give the new administration a clean slate heading into 2025. That's not the case. In terms of fiscal year 2025, we're operating under what's called a CR or continuing resolution. That expires on December the 20th, so we are still funding the federal government until then. I think we'll likely see another temporary continuing resolution enacted before December the 20th, before the expiration. And I think they'll fund the government sometime into March of 2025. This will impact West Basin and other utilities, since if the inclination is to pursue discretionary grant funding from the EPA or the Bureau, this could lead to delays in the issuance of notice of funding opportunities and ultimately the awards. This delay has become the new normal in Washington, D.C. For those of you who are baseball fans and you've heard it on TV or on the radio, you've heard the announcer say, "For those scoring at home." Well, for those scoring at home, the last time Congress got all 12 annual appropriations bills completed on time was in 1996. I'm a little more bullish on the remaining 3 items. I think we'll see a finer water resources development law enacted before the end of December. I'm hearing that they've largely completed work on the bill, and now it's a matter of sort of spell checking and quality assurance, quality control on the last document. I'm hearing the House may bring up the package as early as next week and the Senate the week thereafter and get it ready for President Biden's signature before the end of December. And I think we'll see a final defense bill to protect the homeland on a similar but probably non-parallel path. Lastly, with the natural disasters that struck the nation this year, we'll probably see what we call a supplemental appropriations law sooner rather than later to aid those presidentially declared disaster areas. Last week, the president sent over an almost $100 billion request to fund FEMA, the Small Business Administration, Department of Transportation, and some other agencies to address the wildfires, floods, hurricanes, and other tragic events over the past year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Pete for the next slide.
Thanks, Jeff. And with these next 2 slides, it's going to wrap our presentation. Just give you a heads up. What we'll cover in with the upcoming 2 slides are the actions and approach to educating, advocating, and advancing the issues of most importance to West Basin at the federal level, including vying for funding for its infrastructure priorities. Jeff Ashley and I meet regularly with Matt Vey and West Basin senior staff to keep up on actions that are happening in Washington and opportunities here. Also to understand what your concerns and the district's concerns are and infrastructure needs, and then plan and implement advocacy initiatives to advance your priorities. As we mentioned earlier in the presentation, while we are forecasting tighter federal budgets in the next couple years, we currently understand that congressionally directed spending, also known as earmarking, will continue in the next Congress. This provides an opportunity to bring one or more project funding requests to your House and Senate delegation members for their consideration to champion as part of the annual appropriations process. We've been discussing some potential projects with West Basin staff, and in the next couple months, we'll need to determine which to advance and begin the process of educating congressional offices, submitting applications for that earmark funding, which has become a very entailed and actually involved process, but one we're very familiar with, and we'll be working with staff and with you each step of the way. In discussions with West Basin personnel, we are still talking about options for working with the Army Corps of Engineers to vie for additional dollars under West Basin's Federal Harbor South Bay authorization. There is still approximately 30 million under this authorization. What has been tricky is that this available funding cannot be fully accessed in say 1 or 2 tranches, as the program typically does not allocate usually more than 3 to 5 million a year to a particular project under this particular authorization. However, this funding can also be obtained through a congressional earmark request. So at some point in the future, this may be where West Basin looks to advance a funding request through this account with one of your members of Congress. Moreover, while the dollars at the federal level may be more competitive over the next few years, we expect to see additional Title 16 water smart funding and other grant opportunities that will still be coming out, and we'll be evaluating them as potential fits for West Basin to consider pursuing for any particular outstanding financial infrastructure needs. At the same time, we'll be advocating to protect funding levels and already allocated federal funds to water projects of regional significance. With your large congressional delegation and the changes that occur with your delegation members, especially on the staff side, engagements and touch points are a continuum to be sure that West Basin's priorities and issues of importance are brought to their attention. Next and last slide, please. As Senator-elect Schiff Jeff has alluded to this earlier, long been a member of West Basin's House delegation. We've had the good fortune of an opportunity to get to know him and his staff. It was a little over a year ago that DC staff from Rep. Schiff's office visited West Basin and toured the Edward Little facility. We're going to be there to continue to stay close to his office as he moves across the Capitol and becomes more and more educated and engaged on California water issues. We'll be reaching out and introducing ourselves to, Jeff alluded to this as well, Rep. Friedman staff and foster and build those relationships with both her DC and district office personnel. In addition, as new administration officials begin to populate the Bureau of Reclamation, EPA's Office of Water, Army Corps of Engineers will be in communication with them, making them aware of the role West Basin plays in water and Western water. Of course, the senior non-political agency staff are individuals that will remain and ones we've been working with for many years and are important because of their institutional knowledge and the guidance that they provide to the incoming political appointees. As we know, a great opportunity for West Basin to meet and advocate for its federal priorities is your annual DC advocacy fly-in. The 2024 fly-in was a successful one. We had 14 fruitful and productive engagements during that trip with congressional offices, federal agency personnel, and water sector stakeholder groups. You were also able to present West Basin Water Awards to Senator Padilla, Representative Schiff, and Grace Napolitano before her term was up. We are currently awaiting the release of the congressional calendar for 2025. We expect that to be out in early December. But once that comes out, we'll be talking to West Basin staff, to Matt and EJ, and as we look to a week in either April or May for the 2025 DC fly-in. So, and then lastly, as always, we're always working with the aligned state and national water associations that are on these issues of mutual interest. We discussed a number of those already, so I won't rehash that. And so I'll just end the presentation We apologize for its length. There's just, Jeff and I were going over this, and Ashley as well, and realized that there's so much to unpack here. So it was kind of hard to distill. But with that, we'd like to, next slide, please, answer any questions you may have of us. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you guys for an excellent presentation, and we'll see if there's any questions for you. Director Deere doesn't have any. Director Houston?
I see. I'll just say the same thing. I really don't have any questions in the interest of time, but I want to say thank you for an extremely thorough presentation and giving us a good lay of the land. It's going to be really fascinating how the next even just 2 months play out, to see what's going to happen and who's going to do what. Certainly, we're happy that one of our members of the congressional delegation is now going to be our senator here in California, so that's good, as well as Laura Friedman going from the Assembly to the Congress, similar to Kamala Gerdov. So we've got good relations with these folks. I'm looking forward to however we can partner up with them. And lastly, I will say, you alluded to it, but we'll definitely work with our staff here to figure out what our legislative priorities should be and will be come New Year, so that we can have productive meetings and advocacy both here and in DC. So thank you both to you guys, and also Ashley and the whole team at VSA. You do a great job representing us. We're really blessed to have you, and I'm looking forward to when we get to see each other in person. But thank you so much for this report.
Thank you, Director.
Director Gray, do you have any questions or comments you'd like to make?
Yes, Director Houston really said it all. But again, thank you to Pete and Jeff, Ashley, and everyone here. We have great representation at the federal and the state level. So thank you very much. Thorough report. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Gray.
Thank you, Director Gray.
Well, I'd like to extend my thank you also. You guys have done an excellent job, and 2025 will be a very interesting year for all.
Thank you,
with
President
that, we will
Alvarez.
move
Thank you.
on. Next item up is items too late to be agendized. I don't think we have any, so we'll move on to the consent calendar. On the consent calendar, we'd like to move item 7C. And otherwise, do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar with the exception of item 7C?
So moved.
I'll second.
Right, so with that is that a vote, General Manager?
Director Scott Houston,
Yes.
Director Don Deere. Yes. Director Gloria Gray,
Yes.
Director Harold Williams, President Desi Alvarez.
Yes, for all items except item 7B, and that will be a no vote for me.
7D voted on separately. Have we done that yet?
We just voted on it.
You separated it.
I separated 7C. I pulled that out.
Okay.
So we voted on everything. You all voted yes on everything, and I voted yes on everything except 7B.
7D, right? Okay.
So, we will now have a discussion on item 7C. And I would like to, well, go ahead and make a presentation. You can reject that.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. President. Item 7C is the consideration of the fiscal year 2024-2025 district sponsorship request. It's worth noting that this was heard by the Finance and Administrative Committee just last week on Tuesday. And at that time, staff, Carla Hewitt, Executive Assistant, provided the presentation. This is included in your packet at page 25. And again, we have Carla for this presentation.
Thank you, EJ. Good afternoon, members of the board. Happy to present this for you today. So in line with what Director Houston mentioned about milestone anniversaries and events, so like the city of West Hollywood in their own particular circumstances, the COG is celebrating their 30th anniversary. So their General Assembly taking place in March next year, pins around those 30 years of work and their legacy and the vision for tomorrow. We have been invited once again to participate as sponsors of this special edition. Sponsorship tiers range from the top level at $10,000 to the $2,500 tier at the sponsor level. Basin has previously sponsored this event in years 2023 and 2024, though I believe our support to this event goes much further back than that, at $2,500. Details of this packet are provided in your meeting packets for today. And following that, we have a request from the Urban Water Institute for West Basin to join as an annual sponsor. So this is a little bit of a change from what we have seen in previous years, where they offered the opportunity to sponsor their spring and their annual water conferences individually, which we have previously supported at $3,000 each. Now they have combined the opportunity to sponsor these events, and they have bundled those, so to speak. So one of the tiers presented here, which go from $15,000 to $1,000, would cover both events. As additional information, in case it helps the board consider this event for sponsor participation, some of these packages include complimentary registrations. Complimentary registrations are offered starting at the silver level with one, and then they increase as the sponsorship tier goes up. However, registration fees for member agencies typically begin at $5.95 with early bird pricing and go up to $6.95 at the regular rate. So that is just information that you may consider when making the determination regarding this event. And as previously mentioned, just as a recap of what we have most recently done for the Urban Water Institute, we have supported both of their conferences for an annual total of $60,000, going with $3,000 and $3,000 for each event. And just to reiterate, in this opportunity, they are not offering individual sponsorship of their conferences. They're offering an annual package, which would cover both events. I believe the spring conference has already been scheduled. It's going to be in the Palm Desert area, February 26th to 28th, which you may have started seeing on your calendars already. And last, we have the 2025 Water Reuse Annual Symposium, which is also celebrating a milestone edition with their 40th anniversary. This program will be presented in coordination with the Water Research Foundation, and the symposium will take place in March next year in the city of Tampa, Florida. And much like other sponsorship packages, complimentary registrations are available. We have different tiers for sponsor levels for this event. They start at $16,500, going all the way to the advocate level at $3,000. Complimentary conference registrations are available starting at the innovator level with one, and cannot be used towards other water use events. So these are, in a way, use it or lose it, which, for example, the Urban Water Institute sponsorship package would give that flexibility of using the complimentary registration for either one conference or the other. So these benefits are exclusively associated to this event. And as further reference, registration fees for the annual symposium start at $1,050 with early bird pricing, which is available through December 17, going up to $1,600 for on-site registrants. The district has most recently sponsored this event in years 2022, 2023, and 2024, with $5,000, $2,500, and $7,500 respectively. And what we have observed this year versus the years prior is increase of 10 to 20% in the sponsorship pricing with respect to previous year. During this fiscal year, the board has authorized district sponsorship of 2 other water use events for a combined total of $5,000. We had their annual California conference in September, and we just participated as stable public sponsors in their industrial reuse conference, which finalized on the 21st, if I'm not mistaken. Now I will move to the fiscal impact. Funds for the proposed sponsorships are included in fiscal year 2024-2025 sponsorship budget in the amount of $55,000, with the current balance being $16,500 as shown in the corresponding attachment. And with that, I will read the recommendations from the Finance and Administration Committee. That the board consider approving sponsorship of the South Bay Cities Council of Governments 25th Annual General Assembly to be held March 27, 2025 at the Carson Community Center, and that it determines the appropriate sponsorship level. That the board consider approving annual sponsorship of the Urban Water Institute, inclusive of the Spring Conference and the Annual Water Conference, and that it determines the appropriate sponsorship level. And that the board consider approving sponsorship of the 2025 water reuse annual symposium to be held March 16th to 19th, 2025 at the J.W. Marriott Tampa Water Street in Tampa, Florida. And actually, I realized that I was reading the wrong amount. So the finance, and I apologize for that. The Finance and Administration Committee recommendations for the COG event is $2,500. The recommendation of the Committee for the Urban Water Institute annual sponsorship is $3,000. And the committee's recommendation for the water reuse annual symposium is also $3,000. And with that, I welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. So first, we'll open it up to any questions. Director Houston, do you have any questions or comments?
I have no questions. This was the recommendation from the committee, so I'm good with what the committee recommended.
Second the motion.
There's no motion yet.
Anybody?
I have some comments. This year, we approved a budget of $55,000 for district sponsorships. And if all three of these get approved today, the remaining, we will spend $47,000 of that $55,000, there'll be $8,000 remaining. And there will be other requests for sponsorships and so on. So I think it behooves us to think about this a little bit. In light of the fact that a couple of particular events have been sponsored out of organizations have already received sponsorships from us. The water reuse annual symposium is $3,000, and we've already sponsored 2 water reuse events this year. And I think traditionally we only do about 2 water reuse.
There are typically 2 in the year. So the Industrial Reuse Conference is a new event. It was making a comeback after about 10 years, I believe. So they were very heavily promoting that. The Water Reuse Association has decided to partner with another organization for the following year to have a combined version of this event. So for this year, it would be sort of a one-time thing, but you are correct. We would typically see 2. This past year, we would have seen 3 for this coming.
And the second thing on that is that event can be held in Tampa. It's not close by. And so we are already a member of the Water Reuse Association, both of California and the national. And we have good representation at Water Reuse. So I think that, and we ought to really consider that recommendation and look to maybe passing out that, given that we have already sponsored 2 water reuse events above and beyond the dues that we pay for the water reuse. So I'm going to make a motion that we move this item for $2,500 contribution to the South Bay City Council of Government and the $3,000 contribution to the Urban Water Institute, but not any contribution to the water reuse annual symposium, since that organization has already received 2 sponsorships.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, so we have a second, we have a vote.
I'd like to,
Okay,
I just want to make a comment before we vote because I understand what you said, Director Alvarez, but quite frankly, there's a sponsorship in here we recently approved for $10,000 for an event that you brought to us. And I think we unanimously supported it, which was completely out of the ordinary for any of us to do that, let alone that. So to let us know that we are spending money quickly, but not acknowledge that we did a $10,000 one-off or something. I just want to bring that to your attention. So I don't think that, by the
Director
way,
Houston,
can I,
thank you
no, no,
very
no,
much.
excuse
Yes.
me, but I want to finish. And one other thing
I
is,
think you finished.
these were-
Thank you
these-
very much.
these
You
were-
brought that to my
these were
attention.
discussed.
Gentlemen.
I know.
Go
You
ahead.
have brought it back to my attention previously, and I have said, I appreciated the support of that. That is the only, in 4 years on this board, that is the only time that I have asked for any sponsorship, and it's for one particular association, and it's for the 100th anniversary of that association. Okay? That has been the extent of all of the requests that I have made. And so you can bring that up every time, all right? And I will, if you would like, point out how many requests you have made multiple times. I don't think it's gonna serve any purpose going backwards. I'm looking at today's agenda and moving forward. You wanna talk about the past, we can talk about the past, and we can sit here and go through all of these organizations and all of the previous votes that we have made and all of the previous requests you have made. If you want to focus on the past, we can do that. If you want to focus on the present and in the future, we can do that. I don't see a lot of benefit of going back to the past.
Okay. I'm good.
Okay?
Fine.
Thank you. All right.
Director Scott Houston.
No.
Director Don Deere.
Yes.
Director Gloria Gray.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Director Gray.
She hear us?
Hello?
Director Gray, you're
Hello?
muted. Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Okay, what's the motion? I'm sorry, I lost some of it. What was the motion to do what?
The motion was to support item 7C, but only items 7C1, which is a sponsorship of the South Bay Cities Council of Governments for $2,500.
Mhm.
And item C2, which is a sponsorship for the annual Urban Water Institute event for $3,000, but exclude, so not fund, item C3, which is consideration of the Water Reuse Annual Symposium, which is in Tampa, Florida. It's the national, not California.
Okay, my vote is yes. Thank you.
And President Desi Alvarez.
Yes.
3-2, 3-1.
Okay. So we will move on to the action calendar. And the first item up is 8A, which is the approval of a memorandum of understanding for regional drought resiliency water conservation program. Mr. General Manager, would you like to introduce that item?
Yes, thank you very much, President Alvarez. This item 8A, was not heard in committee. This month's Public Information Education Committee, which typically includes all of our conservation efforts, was not held. So we're bringing all of these items to the board meeting today. And so for this presentation, we have Gus Meza, our Senior Water Policy and Resources Analyst.
Good afternoon, President Alvarez and Board of Directors. For this item, I have a brief PowerPoint that is located on packet page 138. So we go to the PowerPoint. Thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this item is to approve a three-way memorandum of understanding between West Basin, the Las Virgenes Municipal Water District, and the Los Angeles County Waterworks District 29 for a new joint regional drought resiliency and water conservation program. The objective is to conserve water by providing residents in the North Santa Monica Bay area with rebates, devices, and other incentives and resources. The timeline is to complete the project by December 31st, 2027. Next slide, please. The project is focused on providing residents with free landscape site evaluations, free landscape designs, rebates, plants, and devices that will help them to be more water efficient. Next slide, please. And here's a map of the project area. It includes the city of Malibu and the LA unincorporated area of Topanga, shown here in the pink areas. And the Las Virgenes area is shown there in the northern peach colored area. For this project, staff will be working closely with the city of Malibu, LA County Waterworks, and our contacts in the Topanga area. Next slide, please. This table provides a description of the roles and responsibilities for each agency. Las Virgenes Municipal Water District is the lead project sponsor, and they will be responsible for providing LA County with quarterly reports, invoices, and a final report. West Basin has hired and will manage the project manager, who is Maureen Besnick and Associates. And LA County will be hiring a landscape contractor to install smart sprinkler controllers in the Malibu and Topanga areas. We will all be working closely with the project manager to develop the marketing materials and implement this project. Next slide, please. Here's the project budget. The project was awarded $630,000 from the Department of Water Resources through Proposition 1, Round 2 funding. There was a 50% match, so the partners will be providing $702,000, which is mostly in-kind rebates and existing programs. There's more details on the budget in the MOU, which is attached to this file. Next slide, please. For West Basin, the actual expense will be $17,109 over 3 years. Each agency must pay the LA County Flood Control District for project oversight and reporting to DWR. West Basin will be receiving $380,200 from the grant. Next slide, please. As mentioned, this project completion date is June 30th, 2027, and the reporting end date is December 31st, 2027. Next slide. For next steps, we'll be scheduling a project kickoff meeting in January with the project manager and the partners. We'll be updating the timeline, developing the marketing materials, and launching the project in the spring of 2025. Next slide. So at this time, I can go ahead and read the recommendation, if you like, or answer any questions or taking your comments.
Could you go ahead and read the recommendation? And
Thank you, President Larson. The recommendation is that the board authorize the general manager to sign a three-way memorandum of understanding with Las Virgenes Municipal Water District and the Los Angeles County Waterworks District 29 for the purpose of implementing the regional drought resiliency water conservation program. Thank you.
so do we have any questions?
No, I'd like to move.
I'll second that. Any comments, Director Neer?
No.
Director Gray?
I'd like to make a comment.
Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to Gus and all of our team that's been working on this, because it's been a long time, and EJ and Joe, everybody knows how long we worked on it. So I do want to say thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to getting this approved and getting started. Thank you very much.
So I would like to add a comment also, and that is that this is an excellent item that we're going to be moving forward on. Although water conservation is and should be a priority for everyone. It is the area where we have the biggest opportunity to really reduce our use of water. And for every ounce of water we don't use, it's an ounce of water we create. Either one of those drops of water is important to all of us. And outdoor water conservation has the potential to really realize thousands of acre feet of net new water. So this is an excellent program and one that I know we have a strong conservation-minded set of programs in our portfolio, but I think one that we should continue to work on, focus on, and expand as those opportunities come up in the future. So with that, we can have a vote, Mr. General Manager.
Director Scott Houston. Director Don Deere.
Yes.
Director Gloria Gray. Director Gray. President Alvarez.
Yes. Maybe we can come back to Director Gray on that later. Okay, next item is the rescheduling of the December board meeting. And the regular December board meeting is on December 23rd, which is a week of Christmas. And what this item is really to move that up to the Thursday of the week before Christmas week. So I think that given the holidays and how quickly this year is coming to a compressed end, that it behooves us to think about moving that board item. I'm sorry, that board meeting. So I'm gonna make the motion.
Before you do that, why do they want to change the time?
Because it would be following, I mean, why did we change it?
It would absorb the pie committee. Currently, the pie committee is scheduled at 11. So this would combine the two meetings instead of having back-to-back meetings.
Thank you.
So with that, I'm gonna make a motion that we reschedule the December annual board meeting from Monday, December 23rd to Thursday, December 19th at 11 a.m.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any comments? If there are no comments, we'll have a vote.
Director Scott Houston.
Yes.
Director Don Deere.
Yes.
Director Gloria Gray. Director Gray. President Desi Alvarez.
Yes. All right, so the next item up is item 8C, is the adoption resolution number 11/24/12/17, amending the procurement policies. General Manager would like to introduce that item.
Yes, thank you very much, President Alvarez. This item 8C, was presented at the Finance and Administrative Committee. It did receive a recommendation to move it forward for the full board on an action calendar. And though I won't put words in Director Williams' mouth because I know he's not here, but I believe he was in support, but he felt that this should be discussed at a board level because of the resolution. And so for this presentation, we have Colette Ayala. This does begin on packet page 150.
Thank you, EJ. Good afternoon, directors. So EJ mentioned, I'd like to bring your attention to action item 8C on page 150 of your agenda packet to adopt resolution number 11/24/12/17, implement procurement policy. The West Basin procures goods, services, and public works projects by following the policies outlined in the district's procurement policy. Best practices recommend that staff periodically review and update its policies to ensure they remain compliant with applicable laws and remain functional. Staff review the current procurement policy and recommend some enhancements. All the changes have been reviewed by BBK, and the approval thresholds, including the board approval thresholds of $35,000 for public works and $50,000 for all other projects, are not changing. Starting on page 153 of the packet, you can see a redline version of the procurement policy highlighting the proposed changes. I would like to point out just a few of the changes. The first step at the bottom of page 157, we have updated the definition of public works construction to match the public contracting code definition.
So the proposed update just matches the definition in the public contracting code. And then under section 5-1.103, we removed the requirement for West Basin to post a notice of recommended award 7 days prior to the board meeting. It was removed in a few paragraphs, and you can see an example of this at the bottom of page 190. This was a suggestion by UBK to remove any potential hindrances for the district. Please do note that we do still plan on posting these notices 7 days prior to the board meeting whenever possible. The next notable change is on page 167. Funding approval limits are exclusive of tax and shipping or freight fees for the purpose of approval limits or approval levels. So this has been added as tax and shipping do sometimes change after an approval has been granted either by managers or the board. And so this just removes that potential issue. The next section I would like to point out is 5-1.109, policy compliance, which you can see at the bottom of page 173 of your packet. We are proposing to add a statement enabling certain contracts to adhere to sections of the policy instead of the whole policy. This is specifically added to address the operations and maintenance contract that we are currently soliciting. The last enhancement that I would like to call out is the addition of section 5-1.111, which is just below the one I just mentioned. This is standard protest procedures. These were drafted by BBK. It is best practice to have these procedures in place. We did post them with formal requests for bid solicitations, but by having it in the policy, these protest procedures will now apply to all solicitations. So now I would like to read the recommendation. That the board approve, adopt, and authorize the president to sign resolution number 11-24-1217, resolution of the Board of Directors of West Basin Municipal Water District, amending the West Basin Municipal Water District Administrative Code as it relates to procurement policy. I'm happy to answer any questions or further discuss any proposals.
I'll ask the attorney if he agrees with these changes.
Yes, yeah, our office was, I think, made the recommendations for the changes, yeah.
Mr. Houston, you have comment? And Director Gray, you have any comment? You with us? Sure.
She's on the line. She's not.
No comments. Thank you.
There she.
Right. I have comment / question. There are two areas in all the suggested amendments. One is with respect to the definition of public construction, which we had to do. I understand that. And set the limit of 35,000 for informal bid. That's because that's in the public works contract,
The $35,000 limit is in the public contracting code.
which is a really small amount in today's world. So I understand that we have to follow the public works contract. So that makes sense there, but I think that we ought to think about as we move forward, either on our own or with others, supporting an amendment to the public works contracting code at the state level to increase that number. Because at the really, 25 years, 35 years ago, that number made a lot of sense. In today's world, that number doesn't make much sense. So that's just a comment for us to think about as we move forward next year with respect to potential legislation that we might want to support. And then the last items that you had put up on the changes to the code, if you can put those back up.
They're gonna be on page 173, I believe.
Yeah. So why are we doing this? Can you explain this a little bit more? This comes from general counsel or?
Yeah, it does. I think, is Craig on the line? I'm happy to go off the cuff, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm
that he
here,
is.
Joe.
Oh, okay. All right, Craig. You want to jump in? I might can give an answer, but there's a problem.
Yeah, we like to recommend kind of standard protest procedures because there's none in the public contract code or the government code. So each public agency is able to establish protest procedures, and we always recommend them because then it gives kind of the guardrails of what a protest looks like in each procurement. And then, for a specific procurement itself, you could actually deviate from these if you needed to, but at least give some guidelines and some timeframes. So there's some stuff to go out, there's timelines to follow and for the contractor, whoever wants to protest the award, and it helps get that process going and continuing. It doesn't just give them an ability to protest 60 days later or 90 days later after the project's been awarded.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. In a lot of places, the bid protest is usually included in the bid package under instruction to bidders. Do we have that? I would assume we do, but do we have that in what's our current bid protest procedure?
We have been including it, but only in the request for bids. So for the formal request for bids for public works projects, we have been including protest procedures. However, we have not been including those protest procedures in like formal RFPs or IFQs or any other solicitation types. So the idea here was so that it will apply to all of our solicitations and not just the request. We have been including it.
Okay, so this is consistent to the T with what we have for a construction contract.
I believe that there are some changes. I would have to review the construction contract to confirm exactly the changes.
Anybody know how much of a difference there is today?
I think the intent is for them to be consistent going forward. And unless there's a desire to do something differently, then the bid package would control.
Mark, were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say exactly what.
Okay.
Okay, well, those are my questions. I will go ahead and move this item if I can have a second.
Second.
Okay. So we have a vote?
Director Scott Houston.
Yes.
Director Don Deere.
Yes.
Director Gloria Gray. Director Gray. And President Alvarez.
So the next item up is item 8D, and this is the approval of the request for proposals for the DCS on house support services.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. President. This item 8D was heard by the Engineering and Operations Committee on November 21st. At that time, the committee board members split their vote, so it's moved forward to the full board without a recommendation. For this presentation, we do have Barker Maserlian, our Executive Manager of Engineering and Operations, and this item does begin on page 180.
Thank you, EJ, and good afternoon, board members. This item, as EJ mentioned, is a request. This item requests board approval to issue a request for proposal for on-call services related to our distributed control system, or DCS. In the past, we've reported on some of the issues our HDCS system is facing, and we've presented and discussed the upcoming DCS improvement project on several occasions this year. We've spoken about the critical nature of the system and described it as the brains and nervous system of our recycled water program. The staff report provides greater detail of what the DCS system consists of. We've also extensively discussed the vulnerabilities and risks the system presents today, primarily due to its age, but more specifically, the obsolete nature of the system and some of its components, with appropriate parts and services being tough to come by these days. Staff is therefore very excited about the launch of the DCS improvement project, which is fast entering into the progressive design build phase. However, we've reported that this progressive design build project will take close to 2 years to implement and complete, which poses the question, how do we best address the DCS issues we've been experiencing in the meantime? How do we address them in the next 1 to 2 years before the project's completion? The answer to that question is either we continue doing what we've been doing, addressing the issues as they arise to the best of our ability, requesting quotes from vendors, negotiating those costs, preparing internal justification memos for those items that have time sensitivity to them, and implementing necessary responses to issues with minimal impact to our customers. Alternatively, our second option would be to look at ways to perhaps improve our ability to A, respond to issues in a more time efficient manner, and B, to do so under a more cost effective or cost controlled contract. Staff believes that establishing an on-call service contract with more than one vendor, similar to what we have with our engineering design services, construction management services, or pump repairs. We believe establishing an on-call contract mechanism allows us to more efficiently address full system issues, system failures, or expedited troubleshooting needs. We believe securing an on-call service contract with at least two vendors through an RFP process will promote competitive pricing between the vendors, allow us to adopt the competitive pricing, provide us with flexibility on vendor selection based on price, ability, and availability, allow us to take quick action on time-critical needs. The draft scope of work proposed for the RFP solicitation is attached to the staff report and starts on packet page 184. In it, you'll see that the on-call contract would require vendors to meet our emergency response times by responding to a request of ours within 1 hour from receipt of notification through phone or remote access into our system, or by responding to our site within 4 to 12 hours from receipt of notification, depending on the need and situation. We currently do not have these type of tools, or this contractual ability to demand a swift response by any vendor to an emergency or a critical item with our DCS system. For non-emergency work, we would require the on-call vendors provide not to exceed price using the set pricing that would come in through an RFP process. They would provide a non-exceed price within 5 days of the district's request. This compares to our experience today where we at times have waited for multiple weeks before we received an initial quote, and for which we typically found ourselves trying to negotiate down some back and forth into proposals coming and going. We also, through this contract mechanism, plan to limit the markup on any parts the vendor would provide to 5%, and we would require them to provide all proper receipts to confirm the cost of the material. So again, there are two drivers behind staff's recommendation today, time related and cost related. We are aiming to cut down on our response time and control the costs of the services. With that, I will read the recommendation. Staff recommends that the board authorize the general manager to issue a request for proposal for on-call DCS support services. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Question. It was mentioned that there was a split on the committee. So can you tell us what that was about?
That is correct. And again, similar to the previous item, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. Director Williams requested that the item move forward with staff's recommendation, and Director and President Alvarez did not support the item and staff's recommendation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so let me ask one more question. At the end of the day, the staff is recommending, though, that we move forward with this. And it's probably been discussed for quite some time before it ever got to this point. Is that my understanding that the staff is recommending yes?
Yes, staff is recommending this. It's worth noting that if the item were to pass and we were to put out the request for proposals for the DCS on-call services, that ultimately the board would be making a future decision once that selection occurs. And then secondly, it's worth noting that any on-call services that West Basin would utilize would always be time and material. So no expense would be borne on the district unless absolutely necessary and we had to call upon those on-call services.
Thank Okay. Any comments, Director New?
I'm just trying to decide. I'm gonna vote again.
And, Director Gray?
Yes, I'm back on the line. Yes, no comment.
If you had any comments or if you want to wait, you can do that. Okay,
I heard, go on, go on.
Go ahead.
I heard part of the presentation. My internet went out, so it dropped. So I heard part of the presentation, so let me hear your comments if you're gonna make them, and I heard staff's recommendation.
I do have comments / question. So what we're being asked to approve on the one hand is a on-call services contract for support service. In general, the understanding for support services would be somebody who can come in, do an evaluation of the situation, and basically assist staff and support. But during the presentation, we also mentioned that individual, in addition to the support, will also be acting as a vendor, that they will be procuring equipment for the district. And I have a concern with one, hiring a consultant that's acting in a consultant capacity. And then a consultant that's acting not only as a consultant capacity, but somebody who's procuring and providing not just services, but equipment and material, which I think in this case may exceed 10 to 20, $30,000 because of some of the potential things they can quote on. And those two things should be viewed separately. If you're hiring a consultant to advise on the operation of the system, identify deficiencies and so on, then that's what we should be hiring. If we're hiring somebody who is going to be providing equipment and not just services, that should go through a different procurement type of process. And I have a concern, and I think it's a mistake to blend the two and bring in somebody who is going to be advising on the operation of the system and at the same time acting to sell and provide equipment.
Very good statement, Dr. Alvarez. We had a situation a few months back that addresses this specific topic. We needed controllers. As we described the DCS system, it's the system itself that's old, and there's only a few of the same system left out there. So we had a situation where we had to order, we needed new controllers, and the vendor found them in different area of the United States and offered us a price for them. We thought they were expensive, so we looked in other places and found them at a cheaper price and purchased them. So that ability will still remain with us. It's where we want them to have, where we want to have the option of purchasing it through them is when we can't find the pieces of equipment ourselves, but they do through some of the other outfits that are out there that are left on the same system. That's why we added that component.
Appreciate the explanation. Still think that the two items should be split. And we're hiring a consultant to assist and identify issues and make it easier to be able to respond in terms of troubleshooting and finding what needs to be replaced, if anything, or what needs to be corrected programmatically, then that should be its own standalone. And if we need somebody who has access to providing equipment, then we need to have that done separately through a more traditional public works contracting procedure. I just am not comfortable with mixing the two, and I don't think it's appropriate to do so. So with that, I am going to make a motion that we ask staff to bring this back. And as a two component item, one is if we want to bring in a consultant to assist staff in troubleshooting any deficiencies in our data control system, and we'll do that, but the procurement be done for traditional procurement method. So that's my motion. If I can get a second, if not, we'll look for another motion. Okay.
I'll go ahead and move staff's recommendation.
I'll second that motion.
So was there not a second on yours? Okay.
Great, go ahead.
Yeah, I do have some comments. In light of what Director Alvarez just said, I almost second the motion for discussion. Is that what he expressed? Is that a concern of the general manager? Because I do know that, you know, this is an on-call services, and that any contract or any services that we use would be brought back to the board for approval. I believe that's what was said, but I want to make sure that the general manager is okay with what he said or has some comment. I know staff has commented, but I want to make sure that that is not an issue for the agency, for him. So can you comment on that?
Director Gray, staff stands by the recommendation in the board memo. I believe what President Alvarez asked us to do is his motion was to bring back a new item separating out the consulting services and the procurement services for a future action. My understanding was that there was no second of that motion. Director Houston then made a motion to support staff's recommendation, and I believe it was seconded by Director Don Deere. In relation to staff's position on President Alvarez's motion, yes, we could separate those out. We could bring them, but I would assure the board that any significant procurement process would be managed through our normal procurement process, even if we're to utilize the services of a consultant. Again, these are for emergency services. So we do have a procurement process for emergency situations. And I think that the example provided by our executive manager of engineering and operations are such that we continued and always will do everything we can to find any items that are needed at the cheapest possible price. And Barkov, I don't know if you have anything to add or if I missed anything there.
So you described it really well, EJ. I would just ask you that this is to help us significantly through an emergency or time critical motions, but it also includes some allowance for non-emergency time.
And
All right, thank you.
well, I don't want to make, or I want to make sure I didn't mischaracterize your statement.
Well, I just want to clarify that, yes, the intent here is to be able to procure anything that needs to be procured as difficult to procure as quickly as possible. The conflict that we are exposing ourselves to by doing this is we're hiring a consultant that's going to be doing a lot of troubleshooting of the system, which to date has been done by the staff. Okay? And the staff has done a good job and will continue to do that, and I'm not quite even sure that we would need that, but we're hiring a consultant to do that. Now, this consultant will also then be stepping into the role of procurement. Yes, he will be making that recommendation, but those items are not going to be brought back to the board. They will be purchased under this time and material type of contract. And that puts what we traditionally think of as a consultant, who is not one that's acquiring equipment on behalf of the agency, in the position of doing both, evaluating problems and maybe saying the easiest way to repair this problem is by procuring some kind of equipment, and they know where to get, which facilitates everything, but it does so a lot of potential conflicts of interest, in my opinion, and I don't think it's good public policy to move in that direction. We have a motion in front of us right now to move that item that way. And again, I want my concerns noted, and I think they will be.
President Alvarez, uh, if I could, and I don't want to step on any of the motions, but what I'm hearing from staff is that we actually could, if the board wanted to approve the RFP for on-call services, we could actually just redline the procurement portions and move forward with the RFP on the consulting services, but redline the procurement, which I think would address your concern.
It's not the motion that,
No. I'm saying that we could do. I don't want to interfere with the motions that have been.
Let me ask a question. So, again, we are looking at potentially approving staff recommendation, which of course was vetted by everyone, I'm assuming including legal counsel. So are we potentially in the jeopardy that the president is suggesting we might be in?
I think above a certain threshold, you'd have to come back to the board anyway. So I think we're safe. I mean, I think what President Alvarez is also saying is the appearance of someone who's got their head under the hood is also making recommendations a little bit. But I think from a legal standpoint, we're fine with staff recommendation.
Okay, so I think we should just move forward with staff recommendation.
okay. We vote.
Director Scott Houston. Director Don Deere.
Yes.
Director Gloria Gray.
Yes.
President Desi Alvarez.
No. Okay. So we are going to move to item 8B. Which is the award of the contract for the hauling and disposal of beneficial reused solids to the Edward C. Little Recycling Facility. Mr. General Manager, make a motion, would you like to introduce that item?
Yes, President Alvarez. This next item, item 8E, was heard by the Engineering Operations Committee on November 21st. As you just mentioned, is related to the hauling and disposal for beneficial reuse of solids from the Edward C. Little Water Recycling Facility. This item will be presented by Uzi Daniel, our Manager of Operations. It does begin on packet page 188. And again, this item was moved by the committee to the full board. I believe that both members of the committee supported moving forward with a contract, but there was a difference of opinions between the first and the second options of the two firms. So with that, I'll hand it over to Uzi Daniel.
Thank you, EJ. Good afternoon, directors, members of the public. Happy holidays. Yes, I'd like to present this action item for disposal of biosolids. We do have solids that we generate at the plant. They have to be hauled off. They're one of the few compliance requirements still managed by the federal EPA. So there's always close adherence with that. I will make a special note that the new O&M contract that will take effect at the end of next year will take this effort on. But for compliance reasons, we need to get us through that time and also a little bit of continuity as we switch over to make sure we're available to manage that. This is a part of the NPDES permits attached to our brine permit to dispose of waste to the oceans. We generate about 25,000 wet tons of solids annually at ECL. There's anywhere from 3 to 5 truckloads. It is needed for both mostly our Title 22 or our purple pipe, but also on the advanced water treatment side, we do generate solids from that side as well, a minimal amount. So for our entire operation, it is required. We did go out to bid to try to solicit some services for this, and we did get 4 different vendors who proposed. And you can see on page 188 the rankings of them, and also on page 189 you'll see another table that goes over some of those vendors and where they plan to send the waste. I will make a note that from the committee meeting, there was a great discussion because this was an RFP. So there was a group of staff that did evaluate and score. And the highest score was Synagro, who had the second lowest cost, or did not come in with the lowest cost. So there was a good discussion on going with the lowest cost vendor.
I will just go over why we chose or why Synagro particularly scored higher, and that is for a few different reasons. And one of them is being able to have more than one location to dispose of. We had an incident many years ago where Mecca landfill, some of you have heard of that, suddenly was closed down by the EPA. And when I say suddenly, no warning. And if you have a vendor that is one of them, they only have one site, that is a risk. So we wanted to make sure we could find someone that had a different, might have had a backup option. In addition, to conform with some of the climate initiatives of the state, looking at distance, how far you have to go, and also beneficial reuse was very important. And that is why you saw those scores. I will make a note that probably it's with the previous item as well, that while this was what the staff recommended, we stand by that for those reasons. If the board at their leisure did choose a different option or lowest cost, there's a small added risk, but staff is absolutely capable of managing that as well and ensuring that we will meet compliance, get our loads out, and work on possible backups if we needed to at a later time. And with that, if you'd like, I can read the current recommendation. And that is that the board authorize the general manager to enter into an agreement with Synagro West LLC based on prices set forth in attachment C of this packet for solids, hauling, and beneficial reuse services for a period of 1 year beginning this January 1st, 2025 through December 31st. Happy to answer.
Okay, with that, do we have any questions?
I'd like to move the staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Okay. The staff recommendation, we're going with the second low bidder, not the low bidder. And the reason, as I understand it, is because they are having two sites as opposed to one site to dispose of the material. But I thought that it wasn't just the disposal, that what they were doing is that the material was going to be reused.
Beneficially reused.
Beneficial reuse, in this case, would be a soil limit.
Correct.
Given where things are with emerging contaminants and other things that will probably be in that material, we are also exposing ourselves to future potential claims / litigation because of that. And that was the discussion that we had at the DNO committee. That there was that potential exposure litigation in the future. Because we will become the responsible party for that. And a lot of agencies are reconsidering selling their waste product because of those reasons. I think because of that, this is not a wise decision on our part. In addition to that, the difference between the low bidder and the second low bidder is a little over $300,000, which is, in terms of just if you look at the rates and that we charge is about $4 in our rate structure. So it would be a good savings to have. And the difference in the rankings between the recommended from Synagro and the next recommended is not that large. They're pretty close. So they're both believed to be competitive. I think that we would be best served went with the second low bidder. And I'm gonna make a substitute motion that we do go with the awarded for the second low bidder for one, reducing our exposure by selling soil amendment that is gonna have some contaminants in it that will expose the potential litigation. And two, for significant saving between the low bidder and the second low bidder.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. So we have a substitute motion on the floor with a second, and If there's no comments to it.
Well, first of all, and the person who seconded the first motion, second the substitute.
That's great. I second both of them. That's my prerogative.
Clarifying question, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a substitute motion, then the person who seconded the first could decide to.
So I do have a question. So I just want to understand, are we actually exposed to potential future litigation if we were to utilize the proposed vendor?
Go ahead, I'll go too.
I'll start and if legal, and I appreciate that comment because Director and I, we worked in the San Gabriel Valley and I started in landfills when the big BKK and when they came after any pockets. And some of our original Subtitle D regulations were enacted to protect landfills. So I understand with some of the PFAS where that's going. Do we want to later have that exposure? I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I agree at this time. Probably, as you saw today in the presentation, there's going to be a big push to protect water and wastewater. We need to make sure recycled water is included in that, of course. And because we need to provide these services. So I would say that right now it's sort of up in the air. There's been precedent in the past where that occurs. Perhaps we've learned from that how to protect ourselves. But where that exposure lies with some of they categorize it as hazardous waste. I believe that will be moving forward as opposed to this point now.
I mean, my understanding in using those more is that we have some potential exposure, whatever the path is. And I'm not necessarily the expert to say that compost versus landfill is better or worse than the other.
Yeah. My concern is that if you put it in as a soil amendment, it makes it a lot more, there's exposure both ways, I agree, because what we're doing is PFAS and other contaminants are gonna be in that waste. But when you're selling it as a soil amendment, it's now a household product. And it's much easier to get support for some kind of class action lawsuit when it's being when the exposure is at an individual household level versus at a landfill. So if you're looking to protect us in the future, the more protective action is the one that the current motion has, and that is that we do send it to the landfill. And it's gonna be a significant savings in terms of doing lower price. But we do have exposure on that. It's unfortunate because some of these contaminants have been around for a long time, but now they've become issues that's a public concern with. Because they're not, we have more information than we did 20, 25 years ago.
Let me ask another question though. If something happened, how would we be paying for that? Is it insurance that would cover us if we got litigated over this in the future, or what would be the quote unquote exposure to the district financially?
It could be insurance. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, one of the things that we would wrangle with is what level of responsibility the contracting party is going to take or versus us. And we've been approached by a few folks wanting us to indemnify them, and we're not wanting to indemnify them. That discussion needs to be had.
It will be a heyday for the attorney.
Okay. So for what it's worth, I'll just say, I mean, look, I also saw where, Sinagro is heading for compost. It's obviously much shorter road trips, etc. So there seems a number of reasons it would make more sense to us. Yes, it costs a little more. But there's a motion on the floor, so it is what it is. So I'll let things move along.
Okay, with that, let's go ahead and take a vote.
Director Scott Houston,
Abstain.
Director Don Deere,
Which motion have we voted on?
The substitute motion.
Okay, yes.
Director Gloria Gray,
Yes.
President Desi Alvarez.
Yes. Okay. It is now 3:30. We have an information calendar, and unless any board member would like to hear any of these items, I would, move that the information calendar be received and filed along with the received and filed calendar.
I'll second. Item 9 and 10.
9 and 10.
Okay, I'll second.
All right, we have a motion. Go ahead, take a vote.
Yes, thank you very much, President Alvarez. Before I read the vote, I did want to acknowledge some things. Obviously, the Public Information Education Committee meeting was canceled this month. I really want to say thank you very much to staff. There's some excellent reports. I know you're all going through these and reviewing them, but for the members of the public as well. Our water harvest update obviously showcases all the great work that we did on water harvest, as well as our quarterly education programs update, our monthly communications update. Excellent stuff, as well as our conservation and water bottle filling station updates. So I'll go ahead and read the vote. Director Scotty Houston. Director Don Deere.
Yes.
Director Gloria Gray.
Yes.
President Desi Alvarez.
Yes. And with that, general manager's activities report. General manager, do you have anything to add?
Yes.
Written conference report.
Yes, President Alvarez, I did want to say that I did receive some assistance from our admin team as far as distributing those out. You should have a hard copy there in front of you, and it also was emailed out. It has been an extremely busy November. I would point out, and I know that a lot of you track these issues, but the Metropolitan Water District has been holding a number of different workshops in relation to the development of a potential new business model. That encompasses several different key issues, but it's been extremely time intensive. And this, of course, wraps into Metropolitan Water District's Camp for Water program, as well as the treated water surcharge workshops. So it has been a very busy month here for West Basin staff and team. And the one thing I would say that is not in the report is just how grateful I am to West Basin staff, all the great work that they're doing. Later this week is Thanksgiving, so I want to say thank you very much to everybody in this room, in this building, and working with us from remote locations because it is Monday. So thank you very much to everybody, and that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Mr. General Counsel.
Okay, I had a question. I'm so sorry. Thank you very much, EJ. This is pretty thick, so I'll probably have a couple things offline to talk to you about, but I did have a quick question. Under operations, there's a note here about the city of Manhattan Beach, something with the copper service line leak repair. What exactly is that? And how does something like that get brought to our attention?
We manage the potable water side as well as recycled water side. And oftentimes we might get called or consulted on potable water. Also, if the directors remember our Purveyor program, we assist the city of Inglewood and the city of Manhattan Beach. So sometimes there will be a little bit of that overlap. We'll make sure to refer them to the right department. But any recycled water issues that occur there, we do get involved with that. That is absolutely 100% ours.
Okay. So, but what exactly happened here? It says City of Manhattan Beach reported 2-inch copper service line leak repair for a greenbelt irrigation meter.
Yeah, it was recycled water. I'm not sure that this is on copper. For that case, that wasn't a result of anything, but it was a service line leak in there. And it took some heavier coordination to get it valved off. We had to shut the entire reed belt off. But we are in communication with the city of Manhattan Beach the entire time. They are very appreciative of that for service. And for Mark was great at getting out there. We're always quick to respond and have some on calls that are available to get that fixed as soon as possible.
Okay. I just want to understand though one other thing, Uzi and everybody, because obviously a lot of us are out and about all the time. I do sometimes see where, you know, there's some damage, wires hanging out or whatever. And who knows whoever says anything. Is this one of those situations where if a resident said something to the city or whomever, and then it gets brought to our attention, how does that sort of work? If we see something.
No. You're absolutely
Go ahead.
right. It's very interesting because we sometimes will get, I've gotten a call, in the middle of the night from a police department who will cover their bases and call the local water company, the local fire department. They'll call us out and they don't know if it's a large leak. Otherwise, what typically occurs, if there's a lot of areas where we're an urban area where pipes cross over each other. And so a couple of us might get called out, or we might call out the potable as a courtesy, the potable water purveyor, so we can go out there. One really great test is we can take conductivity. That can help us decide if it's recycled water or not. It is not uncommon for us to get called out because they might see a purple lid, see a leak, and it is actually a potable water leak. It's coming out somewhere else. So we answer any and all calls. There's a 24-hour service line on air vacs and a lot of our stuff. So sometimes people will call us. Our front reception is wonderful. If they get any call, forwarding it to us many times. I know, Amy, you have on the website, we will refer people to their local water company. I would say that's the beauty of the water industry that we can all kind of be proud of. We really are a community. If we hear that there's a leak, more people will respond than not until we figure out, is it potable? Is it sewer? Is it recycled water? That's really how it occurs from all different parts, but we really take pride in it.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. General counsel.
I have no report other than listening closed session.
Okay, so we have the AB 1234 reporting. Anybody have anything to report today?
I'll turn mine in.
Okay. And then we will go into closed session. General counsel, would you like
Go
to?
into closed session today. Sorry, the two items that are stated on the agenda: conference legal counsel, anticipated litigation, 2 matters, and initiation of litigation, 2 matters.
Okay, that would be session.
Hello?
Great, we're going into closed session.
Thank you.
Okay.
with that, we're going to call back into session, the regular board meeting. Mr. General Counsel, do you have anything to report from closed session?
There was no action taken during closed session.
Okay, so the next item up is director's comments and future agenda items. So we'll go around the dais here and we'll start. with Mr. Houston.
Sure, thank you very much. I just want to say, thanks to the staff, because this past Saturday was the rain barrel event for Division 4, one of the rain barrel events. It was in El Segundo at the Etsy Little Plant. Literally 200 rain barrels given away in 2 hours. So I was very, very pleased, and thank the El Segundo Women's Club for assisting with that. But I also just want to say to everybody here at the district and at the South Bay Environmental Services Center, I know a lot goes into this. It's pretty seamless once that morning comes. They all make it look really good. But I just want to express thank you very much for all the behind the scenes work that goes into making these happen across West Basin. And the residents truly appreciate it. So thank you.
And how were those rain barrels?
How were they?
Yeah.
Those rain barrels are great. People are really liking them. They're a little shorter and I'd call them a little more stout than the ones we have given away before. But they do have the brass fittings, which are nice, much better quality. And of course, being that they're local and American made is great. So we heard nothing but good things. Thank you.
Good, glad to hear that. Okay, Director Security.
Just that the staff continues to give excellent reports when they report. I know Director Gray mentions it very often, but I have to agree with her. Just about every time we get a report from staff, it's a very concise and intelligent report. They had a great year this year. Congratulations.
Okay, and Director Gray, do you have any comments right now?
Yes, thank you. Well, first I want to thank staff, and Don already acknowledged them, but they always give us very comprehensive reports. Also, hold on just a minute. I wanted to say that I had a very successful rain barrel event. Thank you, Gus, and all the staff for that. They always do a great job. But I also wanted to let the board know that in next month we're having a very important vote coming up before the board relative to the Delta conveyance. And so Director Alvarez and I are both members representing West Basin. And so I really would like to hear the board's perspective, and Director Alvarez and I have talked about it, and so I'm sure he'll give direction in terms of but bringing this item before the board for some discussion. So I just wanted to mention that to everyone. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director Gray. So with that, I do have a couple of comments, but the first item is the last item that Director Gray addressed. And we need to have a discussion meeting. So we need to call a special meeting and we don't have a lot of time to do it in. So we will be calling for a special meeting for, today is Monday, right? And fortunately, this week is not going to work for anybody. So next Monday or Tuesday, and I will work with staff on that and see about either having a special meeting for Monday or Tuesday. Okay? And it will be a single topic meeting. Then the only other item is I'll jump on the rain barrel bandwagon and say that the next rain barrel event will be done. I think we're doing it for Division 3 this year in the city of Alameda, which is a good thing, and that will be in 2 weeks on December 14th. And I'm looking forward to the new rain barrels. I like the idea of having those brass podiums. versus the ones we've had in the past. Okay, with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you very much.